Venus, Earth's closest neighbor and sister planet, is quite possibly one of the most hellish, inhospitable environments in the solar system. In stark contrast to the cold giants at the system's edge, Venus is a hostile inferno. Its surface temperature reaches as high as 460 degrees Celsius, 860 degrees Fahrenheit. The nightmarishly high temperatures are the reason why it is so difficult to launch successful missions to Venus. The heat is more than enough to overheat most electronic equipment aboard traditional space probes in a very short amount of time. The Venera space probes 13 and 14, launched by the Soviet Union in 1981, were only able to function for 127 minutes and 57 minutes respectively, before their circuitry was rendered useless. The reason for the searing heat on Venus is its obscenely thick and toxic atmosphere, mostly made up of carbon dioxide, but also containing nitrogen, as well as thick cloud formations made of sulfur dioxide and sulfuric acid. The atmosphere on Venus is 90 times denser than that of Earth's, despite both planets being roughly the same size. There is no traditional day or night on Venus, as the atmosphere traps heat so efficiently that the temperature doesn't fluctuate much. It is this thick, volatile atmosphere that is the reason why Venus is even hotter than Mercury, despite being farther away from the Sun. It is also this atmosphere that has caused the most confusion to astronomers ever since they began to observe Venus via ultraviolet imaging in the 1960s. With these observations, scientists noticed the presence of large, dark patches in the upper atmosphere which were not able to be explained at the time. NASA's Mariner 10 flyby confirmed the presence of these patches, and they have been observed in every space mission to and around the planet since. The dark spots in the UV images formed a Y shape, which spanned 10,000 kilometers, nearly covering the entire planet. And yet, even though Venus's atmosphere was moving at around 220 miles per hour, the strange Y shape is completely stationary. A giant atmospheric anomaly standing completely still inside of one of the most harrowing atmospheres in the solar system. This is the story of the dark wave on Venus. As recently as the 1950s, scientists' knowledge of Venus was very limited. It was known that it had a thick atmosphere, mostly because efforts to peer through it had been unsuccessful. Early ultraviolet observations in the 1920s had suggested the planet's slow rotation, something that would be confirmed by radar in the 1960s. It was during this decade that the Y-shaped wave, then interpreted as a cloud formation, was observed on Venus. The formation appeared dark in the images, among many things about the feature that were difficult for astronomers and astrogeologists to explain. At the time, they believed the shape to be a normal atmospheric cloud formation, stirred by the violent Venusian winds. Assumedly, it is for this reason that so little attention was paid to the strange formation at the time of its discovery. In 1973, however, NASA's Mariner 10 probe did a flyby observation of Venus, and it was discovered that the dark Y shape was still present. What was originally thought to be a happenstance formation of clouds was revealed to be a semi-permanent atmospheric anomaly, forming completely independently of the surrounding atmosphere. The dark appearance of the shape was caused by immense quantities of an unknown particle which absorbs UV radiation, obscuring the areas where it becomes concentrated. Even more strange was the fact that this formation was never observed to move at the speeds of the surrounding winds. Instead, it was stationary. The formation was moving at the same speed as the surface of Venus, something astronomers were still unable to see because of its thick, poisonous atmosphere. What connection this strange anomaly had to the surface was unknown and remained a mystery. In the late 1970s, the radar telescope at the Arecibo Observatory in Puerto Rico was used to scan the surface of Venus and reveal its never-before-seen features. Mountains, volcanoes, and vast lava plains were revealed to cover the planet. A decent image of Venus was now available, but its harsh and unforgiving nature still made exploring it nearly impossible. Seemingly because of its unwelcoming climate, very few missions to or directly involving the planet have been conducted in the years since. In the meantime, NASA has been dealing with criticism for its neglect of Earth's twin sister. Speculation ran wild as always, and some claimed that the wave was evidence of some sort of abnormal or unnatural occurrence on Venus. Undoubtedly, there were those who believed some sort of intelligent presence was responsible for the formation. Considering the lack of context or information offered by NASA, this is understandable. And with more time with no answers, these narratives had little to do but devolve further and further until they resembled very little the events that originally inspired them. The anomaly's history became jumbled, muddied, as the facts were confused and misinterpreted. But over the years, even in the most fringe corners of the internet, this speculation began to die down. Bigger and more spectacular mysteries surfaced, ones that were receiving much more attention from the space agencies. There were still scattered voices asking questions. Outside of a few articles and videos, however, the subject of the Y-shaped formation and its mysterious origins were seldom discussed. Even the speculative internet seemed to forget about the giant anomaly on Venus. However, in 2010, Japan's space program launched a probe by the name of Akatsuki, which was launched with the intention of orbiting Venus and observing and studying its atmosphere, specifically the unknown ultraviolet absorber causing the dark patches in the mysterious Y-shape. Unfortunately, however, it would require a relatively sensitive maneuver for Akatsuki to enter the orbit of Venus. This maneuver was complicated by an expected momentary blackout caused by Venus obscuring communications to the probe. After the blackout, communication was not re-established until it was too late to meet Venus's orbit. Though the rendezvous failed, Japanese astronomers did not give up. They waited as Akatsuki aimlessly orbited the Sun and planned to attempt the orbital insertion again at a later date. 5 years later, in 2015, Akatsuki finally entered Venus's orbit. Upon scrutiny of the Y-shape, Japanese researchers found that they were observing a gravity wave. These researchers were the first to describe the anomaly in this way. A gravity wave occurs on a planet as wind blows over surface features, like hills and mountains. Gravity attempts to restore equilibrium to the system, but it often overcompensates, and this fluctuation forms a gravity wave. Based on Akatsuki's observations and the subsequent research done by the Japanese space program, it was determined that the wave was caused by the aggressive Venusian winds rushing over the Aphrodite Terra mountain range, creating a gravity wave in the atmosphere which propagated upwards. The wave was then distorted into the famously observed Y-shape by the surrounding winds. A team at UCLA created models which nearly flawlessly reproduced the wave under these conditions. It would seem that the wave, in its decades shrouded in confusion, had a perfectly reasonable explanation. However, because NASA couldn't be bothered to devote more time to studying our closest planetary neighbor, it took half of a century and a space agency which hadn't launched a planetary mission in nearly 20 years to figure out that the wave on Venus was caused by a mountain range. Meanwhile, after the Akatsuki mission, one need only search Venus wave in any common search engine to be inundated with articles and videos that are all attempting poorly to make a clickbait headline out of the phenomenon. These articles frequently contradict facts, misrepresenting the Japanese team's findings, and sometimes forgetting altogether that the wave was known for over 50 years before Akatsuki. So what does this mean? It means that NASA's neglect of Venus has caused a vacuum in the narrative surrounding the planet, and that vacuum needs to be filled. And like proposed plans for the space around Earth, someone will inevitably fill it with garbage. It is theorized that up to 2 billion years ago, Venus could have been completely habitable. Its size, position relative to the Sun, atmospheric composition, and internal heat source all make it possibly the best case in our solar system for having once supported life, civilization even. It still isn't even known what the particle responsible for obscuring the ultraviolet images was. And yet, the most powerful space agency in the world hasn't launched a mission focused on Venus in 30 years, and there are no scheduled missions in the future. Venus has been abandoned, and the only person on Earth who is likely crazy, intelligent, and opportunistic enough to return there is busy launching Wi-Fi into Earth orbit, which is much more than can be said for NASA. At least there is one silver lining on the noxious sulfuric acid cloud that is NASA's ignorance of Venus. There is still mystery about her. We still have only fleeting glimpses of her features, raised from her surface by a tumultuous past. In this age of information, Earth's secretive twin, cloaked in her tempestuous acidic shroud, is still allowed to captivate us through the sheer wonderment of the unknown. Thank you for watching and listening. If you like this video and you'd like to see more like it, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. And if you'd like to support the channel in a more direct way, feel free to donate via Patreon or pick up some merch at myrepresent.com merch store. Links will be in the description as always.